That was the story that changed my life. You know, old timers at the New York Times, they used to tell me, one story will change your life. You can count on it. You better hope it's a good one, because it can just as easily be a bad one. It will define you. And I was very lucky that this story came along. And it's like love, you know, you don't have to ask yourself. You just know. I knew this was my story. I also knew it could go either way. And it wound up turning out well. And people liked it. And the newspaper came to me and asked me what I would like to do next. And it was the first time they'd ever asked me what I would like to do. So it definitely changed my life. It gave me some confidence as a writer. And it gave me momentum, which is so important. It was a piece about Bob Satterfield, a boxer from the 50s. And I got a tip from our police reporter. I was just languishing at the LA Times. I was in their ghetto, the Orange County edition. I was writing business stories. I had taken a giant step backward in my career after feeling like I'd gotten some traction at the New York Times and the Rocky Mountain News. And now I was writing these awful, boring stories that I forgot before I'd finished writing them. And the police reporter came to me and said, "You look bored. I heard that a guy named Bob Satterfield, a big prize fighter from the 50s, is sleeping on park benches in LA. Why don't you see if you can go find him?" And I looked up Bob Satterfield, and I couldn't believe that this might be true, because Bob Satterfield was very famous in the 50s. By all accounts, he was the most murderous heavyweight who ever came out of that division. He was a lights-out killer. But he also had a tragic flaw. He couldn't take a punch, and this led to his early retirement. And he hung up his gloves and he went to Paris and studied painting. He was best friends with Miles Davis. I mean, he was just remarkable. I found him in LA. I spent a month with him. I bought him many lunches. I put together this profile I was very proud of. I was just about to shove it into the paper when I made a last-minute fact-checking call to Ernie Terrell, a heavyweight who knew him back in the day. And I said, "I'm just doing a last-minute check." And there was this terrible silence, the kind of silence you only hear in journalism on the phone. He said, "I don't know who you are or what game you're running, but Bob Satterfield's dead. He's been dead for 20 years. So that was, my stomach dropped through the floor. I went out and found my boxer. I gave him a test on Bob Satterfield. I said, "Who are you?" He said, "I promise you I'm Bob Satterfield." I gave him this test, A+, every question. So I either had a guileless psychotic or a really brilliant imposter on my hands. And to their credit, the LA Times let me go around the country and figure out who they'd buried in Chicago and who this guy I'd been spending a month with really was. Was he really Bob Satterfield? They let me write it up in first person as a kind of a detective story, and to weave in some of why it obsessed me, this question of men who hide their identity, drop out of society, because of course that was my father. So, yeah, and it really it is the story that people ask me about most often, even much more often than the story that won the Pulitzer. It seems to resonate with people because I think identity is such a vexing question for people.